Hi, this is Cam from the Nerd Book Review, where I strive to broaden your fantasy horizons. Today, we are going to talk about Gods of the Wyrdwood by R.J. Barker. This is the first book in the Forsaken trilogy. It is his third trilogy overall. I actually happen to have the first ones of the other two as well. The Bone Ships was the first book in the Tidechild trilogy. His first trilogy was the Wounded Kingdom trilogy. The Blood of Assassins was the first of those books. I was a big fan of both of his previous trilogies, and that was a big reason why I wanted to read Gods of the Wyrdwood. RJ ever watches this. I do like my all red, my reddish orange theme I've got going here. And Gods of the Wyrdwood with that green does throw it off a little bit. Still a beautiful book cover, though, so we'll keep it right there with the other two. The book is 640 pages long. It was published this summer. I think came out at the end of June. And Orbit is the publisher for this book, just like his other two series. I know I mostly read indie books, but Orbit is far and away my favorite of the big five publishers because they have a real tendency to pick up a lot of those SPIFBO winners. Sometimes not even just SPIFBO winners. Hexologist by Josiah Bancroft just came out, and his Books of Babel series is among my wife's favorite series. So they pick up a lot of books from indie authors that are successful, and I think that maybe that's why I like Orbit so much, because they have a lot broader feel of what they pick up than some of the other ones do. This book, Gods of the Wyrdwood, is definitely leans Grimdark. For some reason, I was slightly surprised at how Grimdark it was, but then I went back and looked at some of the other books that he's done, and they also lean a little bit Grimdark. The Wounded Kingdom, like magic, when it's used, just completely kills off parts of the land. The Tidechild trilogy, lots of people die. People are out on the sea, killing the Leviathans and stuff, and it's pretty dark as well. So this just kind of follows the way that RJ writes in general. You're going to get a lot of really beautiful prose. You're going to get world building that's really solid, bordering on amazing at times, and you're going to get a lot of characters with a lot of nuance. I also, so Gert in the Wounded Kingdom one, he's a teenager, but a lot of the other characters, both in this book and in the Tidechild books, are, they're older, middle-aged even. And I think that that's a big draw for me as well. Probably now that I'm, middle-aged myself, that's a draw for me. So getting into this book itself, the first thing I have to talk about is that I had a heck of a time getting into this at first. It took me a good solid 25 or 30%, and me putting the book down for a few days because of one specific reason. And I will be the first person to admit that I can get fixated on things, and occasionally that'll cause me some problems. Well, RJ has created every single creature, from the insects to the things living in the ground, all the way up to the sky. And they really don't have a real world analog in many cases. Like, there's no version of cats or dogs that he's created. The one, I guess what would be like their version of a cattle dog kind of reminded me of like a fuzzy dragon. I think like Sisu from the dragon, the newer dragon movie that kids watch. I just kind of thought of it as like a fuzzy, long dragon-like thing that didn't have wings. And it liked to wrap around one of the main character's necks. And I just, so like, really, like I said, there's just not a real world analog. So, I kind of got fixated on that at the beginning. And I spent more time trying to imagine what the creatures look like. He's got a lot of creatures that have tentacles. Now, RJ, I got to ask you a question. What's up with the tentacle fascination? But anyways, so like these creatures were fantastical. Like, some of them almost felt like they were like eldritch horror type creatures. I got like a Black Company on when they're on the Plains of Madness kind of feel at times, except that instead of being in like a desert, that's all in the forest. But for some reason, at the beginning of the book, like, I just kept on thinking of what those were going to look like. and that popped me out of that movie in my mind for a bit. And so after a couple of days of slowly reading while I was when I did have the opportunity, I've been like crazy busy with my kids' soccer for the last about 2 weeks now. So when I had the chance to read, I just set it down for a little bit and I read another book. And then when I came back to this book, it was like I was over that fixation on trying to figure out what all the creatures look like. Maybe my brain had time to process them. So from that point on, it was 2 days where I read a ton. I stayed up like 90 minutes past my bedtime, 2 days in a row. And for those of you who have watched my other videos, I get up at 3 or 4 in the morning. So if I'm staying up till like 10:30 at night to read, well, that means that I'm getting like 5.5 hours of sleep sometimes. And I was pretty darn tired, but I knew that if I didn't keep reading, that second night especially, that I would just be thinking about the book anyways. So I'll talk more about that once I get into my my review part of the book, and we'll discuss what that means for my rating. So let's talk about the book itself, the world, the plot, the characters, and all that fun stuff. The world is called Krua. The way it works is a little bit... it's opaque at first and a little bit unsure, but basically you have a northern hemisphere and you have a southern hemisphere, and the world has a tilt to it. So that when one cult or another of the gods is in power, they can actually literally force a tilt of the world so that the northern hemisphere is either warm or cold, or the southern hemisphere the opposite. So currently the southern hemisphere has the tilt so that it's warm and temperate and people are able to live much easier lives. And in the north, it's very cold. They have like the seasons of like harsh, and then and that's kind of almost as good as it gets, right? To where it's not constantly snowing and freezing on the ground. But as a result, there's basically like constant warfare between the cults, and you try to have through means that we definitely don't figure out till the end of the book, so I'm not going to talk about it. They can actually force that tilt of the earth, and so the North fights the South an awful lot during throughout the entire time. We're dealing with a fallen society. That's part of that whole Grimdark theme. In a previous greater age, things weren't like this. Everyone had a lot better life. There are cities that have giant towers that people are no longer capable of recreating. Sometimes those towers will actually fall because they're so old. It's funny because the richest people will live on the lowest levels of those, even though they have to live in amongst the smells and the smokes, because sometimes those towers will collapse and you have a whole lot better chance of surviving if you're not up high. So the poorer people tend to live up high when they're in the cities. But generally people in this story are going to be living in like smaller villages that are fortified. I kind of thought like, and everything is forested as well. Generally, like, right, we're not dealing with like a whole bunch of like cut down areas because there's just not enough people anymore. And so I kind of thought like isolated villages with like hill forts almost is kind of the theme I thought of. The world, the magic system is kind of intertwined with the way the whole rest of the world is. So you have these giant forests. We're talking trees that are miles tall and that are hundreds, if not thousands of feet in diameter. And so they're just absolutely massive and giant. So you have this deeper Wyrdwood. Then you have the Harnwood, which is kind of like a forested area, but it doesn't contain those giant god trees. And then you have the forest edge, which is where people live in the villages. And people don't go into that forested area if they can avoid it, because the forest has like a mind of its own. It's still got some of the old gods. And it is a malevolent force that does not like humans and the way that humans act. So those creatures that are in the forest, some of them are absolutely terrifying, and some of them actively will try to kill humans when they're in there. The forest also has like a mind of its own, can actually create these little saplings that run around. So, like I said, there are tons of fantastical creatures. So the world feels very vivid and alive. And every single one of those RJ had to come up with in his own mind. So the world is a scary place for people, basically. unless you have, you know, a lot of power or you are somehow in harmony with the forest. So people stay out of the forest when they can avoid it, unless one of those big giant trees falls, and they call that tree fall. And then they'll send in an entire army in order to harvest that tree. And one of the reasons why those giant trees are so important is they have so many different kinds of woods available in them. There doesn't appear to be any metal at all in this world. All of the weapons, all of the armors, they're made of wood and fungus. And getting into that, talking about the fungus seems to play a huge role, just like we're starting to finally figure out within our own world that, you know, like even trees, they can be fed nutrients and waters, you know, potentially through the mycology underneath the ground. And that's how some of those trees that are isolated are able to survive, you know. Well, in this world, even the magic system is tied into that fungus. So the way the magic system works is also pretty brutal in this world. So that fungus, that mycology I've talked about, well, that will actually throw people like into like kind of what feels like a dungeon. And some people can actually take like that fungus inside themselves. They call it a cowl. It'll live under their skin. And the way that it is both activated and the way it needs to feed is by touching someone and actually sucking their life force out. So the Rye, that's what the people who have the cowl are called. They're like the lords of the land. They're long-lived because of that. They can use magic. Most of it, if you're not super powerful, is through touch itself. But like they'll take that power. The cowl makes them cruel. And so like the more you use it, like the worse of a person you become basically too. So you take that power and they'll like torture people to death. Like they'll sacrifice people like to the gods. And at this point, like one specific god has managed to take power in the north, and they're actually getting really close to being able to conquer the area they need to conquer to do that tilt. That's going to be something that goes on in the story and is like important to the storyline. But I'm not going to get too much into it right now, just to know that basically those people will take that power and it helps feed their cult and their power of their cult as well. And so, you know, using magic is a thing that harms people as a general rule. They'll sacrifice lots of criminals and things like that to those cowl users. There'll be a battle scene or two even where they'll like steal it from their own soldiers. So basically the magic users are generally not good people, whether they start off as good people or not. One of our main characters, who I'll get into pretty quick, Kahan is his name. He was actually like basically the champion of one of those gods at one point, and he is trying never to use his cowl again so that he doesn't, you know, become such a bad person but it's definitely going to limit him by not using that and not sucking life force from people. So let's go ahead and start talking about our 2 point of view characters. The first one is Kahan. I hope I'm saying that right. It's Chan. He was a clanless. So people who are clanless, they don't have paint on their face denoting that they're part of a clan. They are basically treated like garbage in this world. They don't have really any rights. His family, when he was a little child, that's when the book starts, is like trying to eke out their existence on a farm. And basically, like, you know, they could be kicked off that farm at any time if they're killed or harmed, and there's no repercussions against the person who harms them because they're clanless. And so, what's going to happen at the beginning is one of the high priestesses of one of those, you know, hundreds or thousands of gods who's in place at this first beginning part of the story is going to find him. For some reason, she decides he's special, and she takes him back to her monastery, and they end up making him what is called the Cowl Rye. They're more powerful than the normal Rye. Like, think of the champion of the god. And then we're going to jump forward in time where Kahan is in middle age. He's trying not to use that cowl that he has because, you know, it makes him bad people. He's just trying to eke out an existence back on that original farm. When he ends up getting kicked off of the farm by another family, he obviously easily could have killed the people that try to take his farm, but he decides not to because he doesn't want to use his power. And he is also kind of trying to hide now that I mentioned that one god has managed to take over most of the area in the north. and is trying to take over the middle area they need in order to tilt the world back to the north as the warm spot. Now, it's important to note that these gods may or may not be real. A lot of them, Kayan doesn't really believe in a lot of those gods, and a lot of the other people don't either necessarily. But it's important to at least pretend you do, because that god that's now, or the cult that's now taken power, Tarl An Gig is what it's called. They'll kill, sacrifice anyone who openly defies them at this point. So that's kind of going to be an underlying theme of like really how Kayan gets into the troubles and the story unfolds for him is because he was one of those Kalrai of another god. And so even though he's trying to, stay away from all of that stuff, just him existing is considered a threat to that cult. And so the second character, that's a point of view character named Kirvin, she is also in middle age. She has a child. Her child's name is Ven. Ven is what is called a trion. They have both genders, so male and female, which and it's not uncommon in this world. A lot of them, there's fewer of them now because of a reason that I won't get into and discuss. But in like their traditional marriages, for example, in this world, we'll have 2 husbands, 2 wives, and a trion who like bridges between the 2 of them, and they'll all be romantically, sexually involved. And so her child, Ven, actually happens to have a cowl, which is the first trion to have one in an awful long time. And that is kind of what's going to cause Kirvin's issues in the book. She herself does not have a cowl, but she was made High Lord of the lands that Tarl An Gig controls, because basically the champion, the Kalrai of Tarl An Gig, put her in power. The rest of the Rai who have that cowl and who, have immense magical powers, they obviously don't like having her have authority over them since she doesn't have a cowl of her own. So basically she's always got a tenuous grasp on power. Her child Ven needs to activate their power, but they don't want to kill. So that's causing her a lot of issues. The storyline itself ends up being fairly connected, but not till about halfway into the storyline. So I'm not going to get too much more into detail on the storyline itself. Just know, fantastical world, magic users are bad, as a general rule. The world around the villages doesn't like the humans. Everyone is in a very tenuous place in the north at the very least. So getting into my review portion, I already talked about how I had a heck of a time getting into it at the beginning. That was because I can get sidetracked and obsessed with trying to figure out what things look like in this case. I talk always about that movie in my mind, and, it popped me out of it while I was trying to like get that mental image of what these creatures and all their tentacles look like. Once I put it down for a couple days and got back into it though, like that was done. And I just flew through the book. I absolutely could not put it down, as I've already mentioned. I stayed up like an hour and a half past my bedtime 2 nights in a row. I'm like tired after reading it, but I don't regret, that at all. The prose, as always, is beautiful. RJ just writes such amazing books as far as the prose is concerned. This is my 7th book that I've read now from him, and I've thought all of them were beautiful when it comes to the writing style. Once I'm in that mood in my mind, I stay there, and I just, I love to read the books. The world building was amazing. This one, even took things up a notch or 2 compared to the other 2 books, because in the other 2 books, I think that like the people and their interactions with each other are more important. And in this book, an awful lot of the book, the Kayan and his little party as they're in like the Wyrdwood are more important than, the personal interactions. And so he really did have to go out of his way to create such a vibrant world when he's creating all of his own creatures, So, that is something that is, in the top 1% of all the world building I've seen in books. The magic system is cool. It's brutal. It's easy to follow. And once you get into reading the book, like you can understand how it works and the way it works. I feel like me getting too much into the details is harder than just you reading it and understanding how it works. But, it requires taking of lives basically to continue to to use magic. Otherwise, it'll sacrifice your own life. You know. So as far as my actual rating itself goes, it's funny. Like I said, normally if it took me that long to get into a book, I'm probably rating it a 3 out of 5. But then staying up past my bedtime to read is one of my almost automatic 5 out of 5s. So this one is the beginning of a trilogy, you know, so it needed some more world building time. Now, that's important to note that it was a me issue, not that this was boring. Like, lots of action is happening during that first 40%. I just had a hard time, you know, getting into it. We're not talking like, we're not talking Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams, where that first 20% of the book is like literally 200 pages of nothing happening. I almost put it down. That was never the issue of whether I was going to put the book down. It was just me being able to like figure out when I was going to get to the point where that I stayed in that movie in my mind. So I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to rate this book a 9 out of 10. I know that that's a 4.5 out of 5 under my normal rating scale. For some reason, a 9 out of 10 sounds better to me than a 4.5 out of 5. And I really do think that this is going to be like that Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn for me, where I may have only rated Dragonbone Chair a 4 out of 5, but the whole series is a 5 out of 5. And there's a reason why, you know, Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams is a book that, you know, George R. R. Martin and a lot of other, you know, the biggest authors use or cite as inspiration. I really have a feeling that this is a series that could become like one of my favorite Grimdark series. I know that sounds kind of crazy when we're talking about only one book being out, but he has set up the world in such a way it feels so real and so vibrant, and the characters, I enjoyed both Kayan and Kirvin so much that I mean, this is going to be one of those that as soon as the second book is available, it's going to be on my pre-order list. I think that this might also be the first one of those of his trilogies where by the time I'm done with it, I'm going to be wishing that it wasn't just a trilogy, or that he maybe would revisit this world at some point, which is something he hasn't done with his first 2 trilogies, right? So I think that that 9 out of 10 is appropriate for this book. And like I said, I'm just super excited to be able to see book 2. Hopefully that doesn't take too many more years to come out. Like I said, this one only came out at the end of June of this year, so I'm sure we have a little bit of time. But I would absolutely recommend this book if you are a fantasy fan, if you're a Grimdark fantasy fan. You know, maybe this isn't like a young teen book. There are some definite torture scenes. I don't think there's any like rape or sexual assault, but and there's not really even any sex discussed. There are a few jokes here and there made about, you know, potentially having sex, but there's no sex scenes in the book. But I would definitely call this an adult book. It's Grimdark. It's Grimdark light, I guess, as far as that goes. We're not talking Land Fit for Heroes by Richard K. Morgan here, but it is on that Grimdark scale. I mean, closing, RJ did a great job, just as he did with his first 2 trilogies, and I'm looking forward to moving forward with the series. Hope everyone has a wonderful day and has good reading. Thank you.